For a soldier as unpredictable as U.S. Technical Sergeant Llewellyn Chilson, there was no way of telling how he'd take the news. In February 1945, recently out of a military hospital in France, Chilson had received word from the Philippines. His older brother, Alvin, had fallen in action in World War II's Pacific Theater. There's no record of how Chilson felt, but before long, he'd disappeared. When Chilson finally returned by mid-March, he had 5 weeks of war left in him. They would perhaps be the most violent 5 weeks any American infantryman would record in the entire European theater. No official explanation for his absence was ever given. Where he'd been, what he'd done, what he'd been thinking. It wasn't the first time he'd gone AWOL from the 45th Infantry Division. The pattern had started the summer before. In June 1944, in Italy, Chilson had vanished for 2 days. The army had let it go with a slap on the wrist. A week later, he did it again, this time for 11 days. When he reappeared, they threw him in the stockade and court-martialed him. He was demoted to private, fined $40 a month for 4 months, and stripped the Silver Star he'd earned for actions earlier that year at Anzio, where he'd escaped German captivity and brought 4 prisoners back across the lines with him. But this time, there would be no court-martial. The army had other plans for Chilson. He resumed his position in Company G as platoon sergeant, just as the 45th Infantry Division was preparing to take its next big step forward, crossing the Rhine. In the early hours of March 26th, they would make their attempt. Chilson and his comrades boarded small boats at 2:30 a.m. and pushed out into the Rhine. On the other side lay the heavily defended town of Gemsheim. The Americans had no artillery support, no air cover. All they had was the darkness. They quickly realized it wasn't enough. Midstream, the Germans opened fire from the eastern bank. Machine guns dug into a raised dike that ran parallel to the river. Company G was exposed in open water. By the time the boats reached the far shore, 2 platoon commanders were down. The men crouched against the base of the dike, pinned, leaderless, unable to see the gunners firing down on them from above. Then Chilson took command. He spotted a German horse-drawn ammunition wagon abandoned on the bank and hurled a white phosphorus grenade at it, setting it on fire. The wagon went up like a flare. For the first time, the men of Company G could see what was attacking them. German gun crews silhouetted along the top of the dike. Chilson started up the embankment alone. He took out the gunners one position at a time, working along the crest of the dike. When he reached the top, he could see further German positions in the farmland beyond. 2 of them, dug in approximately 200 yards out. He crawled toward them through open ground, close enough to call artillery in by sound and muzzle flash. Both positions were destroyed. The company moved up onto the dike behind him. By dawn, they were past it and into the fields east of the river. And there, they ran into the German defensive line proper. 4 machine gun nests laid out in sequence between the dike and the town of Gemsheim. Chilson took grenades from his men and, accompanied by 2 riflemen, moved on the nests, clearing them one by one. At the last position, he went in alone. The Germans inside surrendered to him. By mid-morning, Company G was approaching Gemsheim itself. Chilson, scouting ahead of the company through a stand of trees, dropped into a ditch as a German patrol came up to the road toward him. He let them close to within yards. Then he simply stood up and ordered them to drop their weapons. One American, versus 15 armed German soldiers. The Germans complied. Chilson kept moving. By mid-morning, he had overrun a German company command post. The first sergeant inside surrendered his entire company when his position collapsed around him. Not to Company G, to Chilson personally. When a battalion command post fell shortly after, those Germans did the same. By the time the company reached Gensheim, the question of why men kept surrendering to a single soldier had stopped being remarkable. It had simply become the pattern of the day. As the day came to an end, 225 Germans were in captivity. 11 more never made it off the battlefield. Chilson, moving largely alone, on his own initiative for several hours, had been personally responsible for at least 30 of the casualties and most of the surrenders. While Chilson was crossing the Rhine, a letter was being written in his hometown of Akron, Ohio. Frank Chilson, Llewellyn's father, a World War I veteran, was in failing health. He just lost his oldest son in the Philippines. The only one left was in a war zone somewhere east of the Rhine. So a local veterans organization contacted the War Department. They asked that Llewellyn Chilson be sent home to care for his father. But on the front lines, Chilson was producing something the Army couldn't name. All they knew was that they couldn't afford to lose it. So instead of allowing him to return to Akron, they put him to work. By March 31st, the 45th Division had pushed nearly 50 miles east, approaching the German town of Aschaffenburg. That morning, Chilson led a 5-man patrol into the village of Obenau on the town's outskirts. One of his men was hit. A German bullet lodged between his cheekbone and his eye, blinding him. Chilson crossed 50 yards of open ground under machine gun fire, reached the wounded soldier, and extracted the bullet himself. His company commander would later say, the improvised surgery may have saved the man's sight. As they kept moving toward the town, Chilson's platoon came under fire from 2 directions at once. 20mm cannons firing from behind a German-held town. Machine gunners dug in along its approach. The platoon was caught between them. The position was almost untenable. Chilson ran 300 yards back through the fire, reached an American tank, and climbed onto its turret. He rode it forward into the open and stayed there, fully exposed, directing fire for 40 minutes. Chilson didn't move until the guns went silent. Eventually, Chilson and his comrades reached Mellenhofen, a small Bavarian village, 150 miles east of the Rhine, with a single main street running through it. On April 25th, the Germans had positioned 20mm cannons and an 88mm gun to cover that street. Company G entered from the west. The cannons opened fire. Chilson didn't wait for orders. He found an American Jeep with a mounted machine gun, climbed into the driver's seat, and drove east down the main street alone, one hand on the wheel, the other firing the gun from where he sat. The German crews set their guns to fire on infantry advancing on foot. They had likely not set them to engage a moving vehicle, being driven at speed by one man with a machine gun. By the time Chilson reached the end of the street, the German gun line had broken. The 2 flak guns and the 88 would be out of action before the morning was over, and around 40 German soldiers would be left lying lifeless in the streets of Mellenhofen. Later that day, a U.S. reconnaissance troop was advancing toward the nearby village of Zell when it ran into cannon fire from German positions on the outskirts. Chilson was riding ahead of the column. He spotted an abandoned Wehrmacht motorcycle, climbed into it, and rode toward the German position alone. There were 6 20mm flak guns. One of them opened fire on him from 50 yards. The motorcycle was shot out from under him. He hit the ground, rolled, came up running, and charged the gun on foot. He threw a hand grenade at the gun, taking it out of action and eliminating 3 of its crew. Chilson then ran back to the lead tank of the column, climbed onto it, and directed its fire onto the remaining 5 guns until every one of them had been destroyed. By this late stage of the war, most Allied soldiers were trying to survive the last weeks of a won war. Chilson did not appear to share that concern. 2 days after taking Zell, on April 27th, Company G crossed the Danube and entered the town of Neuburg. On the main street, machine gun fire opened up from the second floor of an apartment building, pinning the platoon in the open. Chilson crossed the fire-swept street alone, reached the apartment building, went through the door, and started up the stairs. On the second floor, he threw a high-explosive grenade into the room, taking the lives of 2 members of the German gun crew. The remaining 8 surrendered. Chilson called the platoon forward, and they occupied the building without a single casualty. As his men advanced toward the next house on the block, automatic rifle fire opened up from a courtyard between the 2 buildings. He tossed a white phosphorus grenade and went in after it through the smoke. A German bullet hit him in the right arm. He didn't stop. He simply shifted his carbine to his left hand and kept firing. Advancing through the courtyard, he encountered 3 enemy soldiers. Gunning the first 2 down, he took aim at the third, only to find he was out of ammunition. As the German turned to run, Chilson chased him down and beat him unconscious with the butt of his carbine. As the rest of the Americans entered the courtyard, they found Chilson passed out on the floor, bleeding heavily. It was his 511th day in combat. It would be his last. The papers started moving in August 1945. On August 3rd, Lieutenant Colonel Louis Hennighausen, commander of the 179th Infantry Regiment, wrote the recommendation. He had read the citations. He'd read Captain Raymond Wance's 4 pages of testimony from the company that watched Chilson take 225 prisoners in a single day. Hennighausen was the 2nd officer to recommend the Medal of Honor. Lieutenant William Owens, Chilson's platoon leader earlier in the war, had recommended it months previously and been turned down. The recommendation entered the Army's bureaucracy and disappeared for 9 months. When it surfaced in May 1946, it was on the desk of General Joseph McNamee, the senior American officer in Europe. McNamee read it, signed his approval, and sent the file to Washington. Washington said no. The board's verdict, dated August 1946, was that Chilson's actions had been, quote, highly commendable, but had not, quote, clearly established incontestable proof of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of life, above and beyond the call of duty. The reasoning was never made public, but the file the board had been reviewing contained more than the citations. It contained a July 1944 court-martial for 2 stretches of unauthorized absence in Italy, and the revoked Silver Star that came with it. It contained another AWOL in September 1944, even though on that occasion he'd been in hospital receiving treatment after being bitten by a German prisoner he'd been interrogating. It contained a 4th, from March 1945, shortly after the news from the Philippines reached him. Most other Medal of Honor recipients had clean records. Chilson did not. On December 6, 1946, Chilson stood at the White House, while President Harry Truman pinned 7 combat decorations onto his chest. No American soldier had ever received so many at a single ceremony. But despite the record, the Medal of Honor was conspicuously absent. Even Truman noticed, proclaiming, quote, "This is the most remarkable list of citations I've ever seen. For any one of these, this young man is entitled to all the country has to offer. These ought to be worth a Medal of Honor." That's what I think about it. Yet still, the Army disagreed. The case was reopened in April 1947 and returned the same verdict. In the 1980s, Chilson's family petitioned the Army Board for the correction of military records and were denied again. The board had been asked whether Chilson's heroism met the legal threshold for the Medal of Honor. They decided it did not. That was the only question anyone in the chain ever asked. But perhaps it was the wrong one to be asking. Nobody asked what was driving him. Nobody asked what was operating in a man who had just received the worst news of his life, who'd vanished and come back without explanation, and who then spent 5 weeks fighting as though the normal instinct for self-preservation had simply stopped functioning. The record shows a sequence with a shape. The word courage does not fully account for it. Nobody ever found the words that did, including him. He re-enlisted in 1947, waiving a 40% disability rating to do it, and served another 17 years. He retired in 1964 as a master sergeant. But while other highly decorated veterans had streets named after them and movies made about them, Chilson was largely ignored by history. He spent the rest of his days managing a gas station and driving a taxi in Tacoma, Washington. Llewellyn Chilson passed away on vacation in Tampa, Florida, on October 2nd, 1981, age 61. He's buried at Mountain View Memorial Park in Lakewood, Washington. Whatever he had been carrying in the spring of 1945, he took it with him.